I don't think there's been much macroeconomic stability in an economy that underwent the absolute twin disaster of demonetization to begin with, and then the botched implementation of GST. Demonetization was a bad idea that gave a great shock to the system, and it was also implemented very badly, with the Reserve Bank of India issuing something like 78 corrective circulars before we all stopped counting. I think it was well over 100 by the time they were done. It really was the most extraordinarily destabilizing decision. It cost lives, particularly of old people who were unable to sustain 8 hours standing in the hot sun in queues and collapsed, in many cases died. It created serious job losses. It resulted in small and micro enterprises across the country having shut down and being unable to reopen. It has completely destabilized the economy, as well as given a 2.2% blow to the GDP growth of this country. So how on earth anybody in the BJP can speak about macroeconomic stability completely beats me. If anything, demonetization alone has been the single worst economic decision taken in the 72 years of India's independence. And then on top of that, they took GST, which was a good idea, and then also implemented it badly. They took an idea for a way of reducing India's 23 different taxes, the various controls on state frontiers and state taxes, and collapsing them, as the Congress had intended, into one tax for the entire nation, one tax on all goods. That was the concept. And instead of that sleek horse, they produced an ungainly camel. They managed to completely mess up the GST idea. They created 3 GSTs and 6 tax rates. And having done that, they've saddled even the smallest eligible businesses with 37 forms to fill. It's been a complete cock-up, to put it mildly. And in these circumstances, I think these two alone have been heavy body blows to the economy. There is absolutely nothing good to be said about the stewardship of our country in the last 4 years, but economic misgovernance.
Okay, I wasn't expecting you to laud the government as far as macroeconomic stability is concerned, but you've raised an important point about demonetization and GST and how that has not stewarded the Indian economic ship very well. But while the jury is still out on demonetization and whether it was worth the cost it entailed or not, isn't formalization of the economy something that we must lord over? And just to throw some figures at the viewers and to share with you, will you grant the government the big achievement on tax collections? Now, the direct tax collections, which is largely personal income tax, at 6% of the GDP, is at a decadal high. We've seen 8.6 million new income tax return filers in fiscal year 17, 9.9 million new income tax return filers in fiscal year 18. Aren't these good signs? The tax to the GDP ratio needs to go up, and this is only going to happen once there's formalization of the economy. Isn't this a direct fallout with some of the things that you criticized?
Yes, but it's much less good than what would have happened if you'd gone for a simple tax. Imagine if we'd taken a GST of one rate, a simple rate, a lower rate, had it applied to everything, including petrol, telecommunications, electricity, all the stuff that they've excluded right now. Had only one GST nationwide rather than a central GST, a state GST, an IGST and all of that. If they'd had the least complicated thing, if they'd had one form to be filled every year, if they had done all of that, you think that the compliance rates wouldn't have been much higher? Of course they would have been. We would have had a much larger number of taxpayers coming into the net, and we would have had much larger tax connections with a lower rate of tax being imposed on our consumers and our shopkeepers. Right now, what you've got is a great deal of seething dissatisfaction. In any case, by the government's own admission, compliance rates are at 67%, not 100%. So it's not as if every GST eligible business is actually paying GST a year after it was introduced. There's a great deal that could have been done better. I still remember the episode when a number of business people in Surat literally gherawed and then kidnapped a few GST officials, brought them to their offices and said, "You upload our forms." And after 8 hours of trying, the officials themselves gave up and considered it couldn't be done. That was the kind of hasty, botched implementation we saw. The IT backbone was not ready when it was implemented, and they gave no notice. Malaysia, which has now decided to scrap its GST, announced it a year before it was implemented, trained everybody for a year on how it should work. And that's how they implemented it. Even then, they ended up with less than satisfactory results. In India, you have an announcement one day and an implementation the first day of the next month. It was absolutely crazy.
Now, there is perhaps no denying that GST could have been better implemented, but I don't want to waste too much time talking about just GST and demonetization. And let me just talk about some of the things that the government will put as a huge green in the report card. And one of them is the big Moody's upgrade. We got an upgrade as a sovereign after 14 long years. Now, these ratings agencies are tough to please. They are not the easiest to please. They're not the easiest to impress. They've got to find reasons for that upgrade. Aren't you going to cut the government some slack on that count?
Well, listen, as you know, we have a government that talks a good game. And when they could justify their worst follies and their worst mistakes as actually steps towards a more modern, sleek, computerized, digitized economic regime, perhaps, you know, Modi's talk impresses Moody's as well. But the fact is that when you really focus on the experience of the Indian economic unit, the human being in this country, the Aam Aadmi, I don't think the experience has been that very positive. So maybe we've got ourselves a ratings upgrade. I hope it lasts. But as you know, many of the things this government based its good news on have now started changing. FDI, sadly, is actually slipping away. It's not going up. Foreign investment in our economy has actually slowed down, and much worse, Indian investment in our economy, that is, the big Indian industrialists, are not putting money into India. They're either sitting on their money or sending it abroad because they don't trust this government anymore. That's not exactly a ringing vote of confidence in the economic management by the BJP government.
No, investment does remain an area of concern, and I think there you have a point. But where perhaps you're attacking the government a lot, and I think both the Congress party, you, yourself, some of your senior leaders like Parayappan Chidambaram are attacking the government, is on high fuel prices. Yes, the government made a big windfall gain as far as the low benign crude oil regime was concerned. But now that prices are going up, it's in the dock because the consumers are burdened with a higher price. I know what most people, including yourself and Mr. Chidambaram, are demanding is a cut on excise duty, is a cut from BJP-ruled states as far as the state taxes are concerned. But isn't cutting of tax a knee-jerk reaction to a higher crude regime?
Not at all. You see, you have to understand something. The government has actually taken a $50 billion windfall. It's something in the neighborhood of about almost 3 lakh crores that they have gained by the more than $60 drop in the benchmark price of crude from the beginning of the BJP government's rule to about its 3rd anniversary. The rise only began in this 4th year of the BJP government, and even then the rise was slow to begin. It's accelerated in the last few months. But for the longest time, I would say 3.5 years, if not quite 4, the BJP was making windfall after windfall. Now, what they could have done with this is they could have eased the burden on the Aam Aadmi who was reliant on petrol, and in that process given a stimulus to the economy. That's what most other economies did. Oil prices at the pump went down everywhere in the world except India, because in India, perhaps out of regard for their precious ratings upgrade, they decided instead to actually continue putting their money into the pockets of the consumer by making the Indian ordinary citizen pay more at the pump when they could actually have at least eased the burden. So prices remain the same. Don't forget that the central government tax on petrol and diesel is not a percentage. Then you can link it to the international crude prices. It's a flat figure which they administer, and they make up their own numbers. Why are you paying 20 rupees per litre of petrol in tax to the central government? Because the central government unilaterally fixes that figure. It's got nothing to do with oil price. That 20 rupee fee was levied on your litre of petrol when that litre of petrol was costing the Indian import bill a fraction of what it's costing today. It was still the same tax. And it's now 15 or 16 on diesel. Then you have the state taxes on top of that, which are a percentage of the price because they charge an excise rate. Now, all of this can be solved by just moving the entire blessed product into GST. The government, which has talked about GST, didn't have the courage to do that. Why? Because they actually want windfalls. So when the news is good, they make the money. When the news is bad and oil prices are going up, what does our government do? They actually turn around and say, sorry, as far as we're concerned, it's not our fault, it's the world price. I'm sorry, that simply won't wash. They cannot have it both ways. For 3.5 years, they profited on the backs of the Indian consumer. They hurt the Indian economy. They may have improved their ratings or they got a pat on the back for fiscal management if they actually applied this money towards the fiscal deficit, but they did no favors to the Indian economy. Let's be very honest about this, Supriya. We cannot be taken in by the bells and whistles of the BJP government. The fact is that they have mismanaged this issue, and even today, there is no reason for them to tax petrol by 20% when they know it's hurting the economy. You know that the price of petrol affects everything. It affects the poorest man's shirt. It affects the vegetables or fruits that go from the market. Everything has to be transported by vehicles using petrol or diesel. And the auto rickshaw uses petrol or diesel. The two-wheeler scooter uses petrol or diesel. It's not merely a Mercedes owner's problem. It's a problem for the ordinary person of India. The entire economy is facing the ripple effect of this. And the government can today say, instead of taking 20 rupees in tax, we, the central government, will set an example and only take 10. Let's see how that helps the ordinary person. Let's see how that helps the economy. And then urge the state government to slash their percentage, since the amounts coming in have increased so dramatically because of the import cost. And finally, make a serious effort to move it into GST. Take petrol off this exclusion list. In fact, abolish the exclusion list. Let every item be on GST.
I'm not so certain how easy it's going to be. I think that's an argument that's being put forward all the time, that if you put fuel under GST, things will improve. But it's not as simplistic as what economists tell us. And back of the envelope calculations also say that the revenue neutral rate is going to make it tough for states to put in oil there. And you yourself in your draft did not put oil as far as the constitutional amendment the GST draft by the Congress party was concerned. But let's switch gears and talk about the other big issue that this government faces, and that is the huge NPA mess. 8.5 lakh crore worth of NPA is what it was left to deal with. It blames you and your regime for passing on what they call are toxic assets. They believe that they inherited a very, very bad, messy PSU banking system. Will you grant the fact that the NPA war that the government has waged, and which was waged actually by Raghuram Rajan himself, and the IBC, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Court, together have in some sense rewritten the debt contract? Indian industry for too long treated debt as equity. Money was misused, bank money was floundered. Do you believe that has changed? And the reason why I'm asking you this question, Dr. Tharoor, is that the whole Soot Boot Ki Sarkar narrative was supposed to allege that the government favors big business. In this case, in the case of NPA or IBC, it's big business that has been at the receiving end of policy.
No, actually, I'm not going to grant them that, because in every single case that they can point to where an NPA may have begun in the UPA time, in every single case, it's about 200-300% higher in the BJP's rule. The NPAs that we have been seeing, all the scandals and scams we've been seeing, are very, very much a product of 3.5 years of BJP misgovernance before they woke up and realized the problems. The fact is that even those issues where there were problems in the past, and mind you, these problems began in the good times. Economy was booming. Banks had confidence that by lending money to successful industrialists, they would get the money back with good interest, because they'd be stimulating economic growth at a time when the economy is booming. That's when the UPA actually built up the initial NPAs.